Well, as people are filtering in, I'll just say good morning. This is Warren Formal with the Minnesota Ag Water Resource Center. And I want to thank everybody for joining us this morning to learn more about this new program, the Minnesota Nutrient Stewardship Certification Program. And over the next couple hours, we'll be hearing from some of the folks involved in developing and now who will be implementing the program. There are CEU credits available for this one. At least we anticipate. We had not gotten confirmation back yet from the CCA panel, but we expect those will be approved. And so if you are a CCA and would like CEU credits for this, we would ask that you either send me an email if you're someone who has my email address, or in the chat box. You can either do it as a private message to me, or you can just send it to everyone, which is kind of the default in the chat box. All I need is your name and your CCA number, and then we will get that turned into you for credits. As we go through the morning, if you have questions for the panelists, we'd encourage you to use the Q&A box at the bottom and simply put your question in. We'll monitor that and attempt to answer them during the presentations or between presentations. If you're more familiar with using the chat box, you can use that as well. But either way, we want to get your questions answered. It looks like our attendee number has stabilized, so I think most everybody that's going to join is there. So again, good morning to those who just came on. You can see the agenda for the morning on your screen right now. And so we're very excited to be able to work with the Fertilizer Institute and the 4R program and their sponsors. And because of the support from these sponsors, we're able to offer programs like this free of charge for you. And so very, very much appreciate the support of all of our sponsors this morning. In fact, you'll hear from some of them throughout the day. So I've already talked about the question and answer box, and if you have a comment to use the chat box. A reminder also that this is being recorded and will be available initially on our Facebook page and then also on our YouTube channel once it's uploaded to that. So if you want to go back and recheck something, you can do that. With that, I think we are probably able to get an early start on our presentation. And so the first speaker we're going to hear from this morning is Sally Fliss from the Fertilizer Institute. And the Fertilizer Institute is an international body that has really played a big role in marketing 4R programs. And here in Minnesota, we've followed and encouraged folks to better understand and utilize the 4R concepts. And so at this time, I'll turn it over to Sally.
Thanks, Warren. Glad to be with you guys this morning. Just trying to change up a screen here quick, and then I'll be good to go. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit this morning about some of our other case study work, and then where we're at with the certification at a North American implementation level. First of all, in case people don't know who we are, the Fertilizer Institute works as the voice of the fertilizer industry. We're based in Washington, D.C., and we represent everything from manufacturing to on-the-ground use through ag retail. Our members are those like Mosaic, CF, the companies making fertilizer, but also the on-the-ground companies that are dealing with farmers in the field. And so that's where the 4R nutrient stewardship piece comes in, is helping provides guidelines and support for how to best use fertilizer across the landscape. We also are involved in research and extension work a little bit. And so in the 2018 Farm Bill, we were able to secure a new high priority item around research and extension grants to be made for the purpose of examining nutrient management based on source rate, timing, and placement. And if they ever pass an appropriations bill again, we do have about $1 million in the current, or what was the most current appropriations bill, that would go towards funding research in this area. So in case anybody on the call doesn't know what 4R nutrient stewardship it is considering the right source, rate, timing, and placement of any nutrients that you apply. We do tend to focus on fertilizer because that's who we represent, but it is really concepts that apply to all nutrient applications, whether that's manure or other byproduct type materials. All considering source, rate, timing, and placement is important to make sure things are working the way they should be working, that nutrients are used, that they stay in the field, and that we get or maintain the crop yields that we're expecting. So one of the things we've been trying to get at for a while now through the 4R program is not just general concepts like source, rate, timing, and placement, but what are the environmental and economic metrics that go along with the implementation of 4R practices. So we've been able to look at TFI both farm level and program level metrics. And so the farm level metrics are the case studies that I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about and show you guys where to find more information on those. And the program level are the ones associated with the certification, where we're working on some new online tools to be able to talk about number of acres covered, practices implemented, overall economic impact, use of products like inhibitor products on nitrogen fertilizer, get a better idea of the level of implementation of practices like that in the field as well. So we come to working on the cost studies, or the case studies around cost, because we did a survey in 2017 and found that it really is not a surprise. The number one question for both farmers and their ag retail partners or their agronomists, what is it going to cost the farm to do new practices? Or how does that help improve the farm operation profitability when we make these practice changes? And they all felt the top 3 barriers to adoption were new equipment needs, labor or time changes, or expertise, all things that are potentially going to mean more money spent by the farm in order to implement practices. The top 2 sources of information they had on fertilizer, they tend to talk to their agronomist or their fertilizer dealer, but it's also really important to them to see what other farmers are doing in the field and what's working and what's not working in order to make decisions on those practice changes. So what we've done is put together, I think there's 13 case studies on 4rfarming.org right now. And there's another probably 15 to be added to that are in various stages of completion. As you can see on the slide, we've got some variety there. It's not just corn and soybean. We do have cotton, tomatoes, and potatoes. We also have strawberries included in those case studies that we're working on. We worked with our 4R advocate farmers and their ag retailers in order to collect the data that we needed to do the case studies. Currently, at the end of 2020, or the end of 2019, no, end of 2020, sorry. We have 90 advocates covering just a little bit over 200,000 acres, representing farmers in 22 different states across the country. 2021, after we make the selection for this year, will be our 10th year of 4R advocates, and we will be up to 100 advocates and hopefully pushing on 300,000 acres of cropland that's recognized as being implementing good 4R practices on the ground. One of the things we also try and do through this is represent some of the variety in the cropping systems where 4R works. So in this slide in the middle here, this is a strawberry farm in Florida. And then we've got some corn and soybean guys from across the country. The one in the gray shirt here is Kentucky, Illinois, Maryland. I think he grows some onions on this farm as well. And then I want to say this one is Kansas. Our 2020 advocates, we added a little more variety and a bunch of acres. So for example, the top long picture on the slide is a 20,000 acre farm in Florida where they're growing sugarcane and sweet corn. So they're in the Everglades environmental region, which is also a challenge. And then we've got an orchard in Maryland, Delaware area, and a cotton grower in Texas who is organic, grows about 30% of his cotton organic. And this is another Minnesota one, I'm pretty sure. And these guys are Missouri. So in order to do the case studies, we worked with the farms, the advocates, to collect 4 years of data at a whole farm average level or from 4 individual fields over 4 years. We collected all the costs associated with any fertilizer application. So the easiest example to talk about here is if the farm is applying a starter fertilizer with their corn, we count for the cost of that tractor and that planter and that starter fertilizer. If the farmer isn't applying a starter fertilizer, we don't count the cost of that. So this is really like a little micro budget of only those costs associated with a nutrient application. So that's why we haven't related it as or communicated it as a return on investment or related it a lot back to the yield that these farms reported, because there's so many other factors that are going to impact the yield on these farms. We wanted to really just talk about very specifically fertilizer practices here and not incorporate those other costs. So we do take into account equipment costs for anything that's used for a nutrient application, including both the time and the fuel used in order to make that application based on some national databases. And the fertilizer prices are those reported to USDA. And then what we've got is we had worked for some time with the International Plant Nutrition Institute about 5 years ago to create some practice tables to group for our practices as basic, intermediate, and advanced. And so you'll see in this table here, as we go from basic to advanced, what the types of practices are that we're adding. So adding more use or best use of nitrification or urease inhibitors or controlled release fertilizer, doing local adaptive management, using in-season tools to measure nutrient nitrogen needs through the season, adjusting for those in-season things, placement. So there's a lot going on when we get to these advanced practices. The other piece that we worked on through the 4R Research Fund and with Dr. Tony Vine at Purdue University is figuring out, as we go from these basic to advanced practices, what can we give for environmental benefits around nitrous oxide emissions? And so what we found in that work was that as we go from basic to intermediate practices, we can credit farmers with an additional 7% reduction in nitrous oxide emissions. And if we go from basic to advanced, we can give them a 14% credit for reducing nitrous oxide emissions. So in the case studies, we were able to calculate out what does it cost to do these practices. So you can see on this slide, on the left-hand side, the basic, intermediate, and advanced kind of progression that this farm made. And as they made this progression, they were also looking at grid versus zone sampling. So the cost difference is really just that expertise cost was a little bit different between the consultant he was using for his grid versus his zone-based samples. But what you'll see here is that as he went from basic to advanced for our practices, he reduced his cost per acre by somewhere between $15 and $24. Looking at the details of some of the environmental metrics a little bit more, we do report yield here in the top, and yield has increased over time on this farm. Again, lots of different management changes going on at the same time. His application rate of nitrogen has decreased at the same time, which has decreased his increased his nitrogen use efficiency. We usually think of that 1.2 pounds of nitrogen per bushel of corn, and he's pushing 1.8 or 0.8 pounds of nitrogen per bushel of corn. So getting really efficient, but the concern is, are we getting too efficient, and are we starting to change that carbon to nitrogen ratio or balance in the soil? That could be a concern for other soil health type metrics that we want to talk about. And then at the end, as I mentioned, we're able to calculate the CO2 emissions per bushel produced. And because of his transition from basic to advanced, we're able to show almost a 35% reduction in emissions just around fertilizer application practices. And this doesn't include any reduction in fuel use or emissions from equipment. So this farm also made a transition from his basic to advanced, from using a really big tractor to inject anhydrous in the spring to using a high boy sprayer 4 times during the season. And that high boy sprayer with a 100-foot boom used about half the amount of fuel as the tractor he was injecting with. So there's other environmental metrics that can still be captured around carbon in these case studies that we haven't quite communicated just yet. just to go a little bit further into that risk of mining soil nitrogen, and something to keep in mind as we push for higher efficiency is, this is from the International Nitrogen Expert Panel. They look at it a little bit differently than we normally talk about nitrogen use efficiency in the US, where they're looking at here total nitrogen harvested divided by total nitrogen applied. And then when we get out, you'll see when we get out to 2017, we're getting up into this area where we're risking mining nitrogen out of the soil and throwing off that carbon to nitrogen balance. So it's just something to keep in mind. And that calculation is a tool to use with farmers to look at where are we falling in this efficiency versus building soil health or changing soil biology. The last piece on these is I do have 6 different farms, corn grain farms across the US, where we've been able to look at the data over the farms. And what we found is that as we, in all cases, as we went from basic to advanced practices, we reduced the cost per acre over this 13,000 acres. We also reduced our CO2 per bushel potential by 10 to 34% across these farms. So we're seeing positive advantages across the board through yield, environmental, and economic impacts of implementing more advanced 4R practices. We do have more, as I mentioned, more than just corn grain on the website. We do have strawberries, potatoes, and coming soon, we're going to have some. There's one of these up already, but there's going to be 11 more diverse crop rotation case studies that we worked on with the UW Discovery Farms, where we've got some different manure applications going in there. We've got some alfalfa in the rotations, and it's really exciting to see that we can demonstrate through these case studies that farmers really are, and their advisors are working with them to credit all the nutrients that are going in these fields, which is a really fundamental piece of 4R practices, is taking into account all those nutrients. So there's great demonstration in those of showing the crediting for first-year corn following an alfalfa crop and the differences in nitrogen application when that practice is implemented. On the 4R certification program, which is our path, what we're going to be spending a little more time on today, and the program that is officially launched in Minnesota, and it certifies ag retailers and independent crop consultants to adopt these proven best practices that we've been looking at, again, through those practice tables and through the case studies and lots of other research, some of the other work that we funded through the 4R Research Fund. There is that science-based framework that Minnesota has been working on to fine-tune what are the practices that are going to be part of a certification program in the state. And we look at those individual farm needs. It was started in the Western Lake Erie Basin and has expanded internationally, with both Ontario and Prince Edward Island also having certification programs now. So just a brief overview of what the program is. It is an individual audit of retailers. It's a third-party audit, so we're still kind of in the process, I know, in Minnesota, of identifying all the auditors that'll be working. And really, retailers are reviewed on 3 main areas: education, monitoring, and record keeping, and the recommendations that they make. Some specific examples are they initially training their staff and their farmers and giving information out on 4Rs? What are the acres related to monitoring 4R implementation, and what's the information, like what watershed it is, and where the farms are located, how are they keeping track of that? And that soil tests and recommendations are used as part of their recommendation program, and there are records for applications of nutrients that are made. Currently, the program has certified locations in 2 states and Canada. It's also coming up in a couple other states. Florida will be hopefully having a chance to get out and certify some locations in the next 3 or 4 months. You guys are coming online certifying locations. Indiana launched their program last week and already has 4 locations certified. So actually, my number, I didn't update this slide. My number should be slightly different for our total. So there's 111,000 acres certified in Indiana now. So that would put us at about 4.1 million acres that are receiving recommendations from a certified ag retailer across the US. So the things that we are able to do with these two is, one of the things we're working on is building this data collection tool, and that's going to let us look at these metrics for the entire program or by a state and a region. Some of the things that we're hoping to be able to get out of it are soil sampling intensity. I think this is going to be a strong metric to talk about. Consumers on the ground can relate to what a soil sample is more than a lot of the other practices we talk about in 4R nutrient stewardship. People are recommended to take soil samples for their lawns and their gardens, so they get the idea of that. And I'm really hoping to be able to communicate total number of soil samples taken, total investment in soil sampling that these programs are making, that farmers and ag retailers are making in order to make the right nutrient management decisions. I think that's going to be a pretty powerful number to get at. Talking about what the frequency of different nutrient application and timing is, and the use of enhanced efficiency fertilizers. There's a lot of policy push to have enhanced efficiency fertilizers be the answer to nitrogen loss. And we know that, yes, they work in some cases, no, they're not appropriate for others. So simply treating more of the nitrogen fertilizer we put out with enhanced efficiency products isn't necessarily going to get us where we want to be for changing nitrogen loss. But it is going to cost the farmer more money as we put more and more enhanced efficiency products out there. So really trying to get at a better accounting of how much these products are used and why those decisions are made. As I mentioned, this is kind of where we're at from our expansion. Minnesota and Indiana are past the pilot phase, and so I need to move them off that list. Missouri is still doing a pilot program in a couple of different counties at this point in time, and we have talked with South Dakota, Montana, and Wisconsin about the potential for developing programs in those states as well. Again, just to summarize up the types of data and information we're going to be able to get out of these programs and communicate out to the public, we've got the farm level data and the case studies that we can communicate to the public, but more importantly, helps us communicate with farmers and ag retailers about how and why and what the costs are to implement these practices. And then for the certification programs, we're really going to be able to start measuring our impact across the landscape as more and more of these programs come online. And with that, these are some of the resources that are available around 4R, and 4rfarming.org, again, is where those case studies and more detail about those can be found.
All right, well, thank you, Sally. That was very good. I have not seen any questions come in at this point on either the chat box or the Q&A box. Again, I'd encourage participants, if you have a question, get it typed in there so that we can attempt to address it either during or in between presentations. So seeing no questions, with that, I think we'll move on to our next presenters. We're going to learn more about the public perception of 4Rs, and we were very pleased this morning to have with us Carrie Volmer Sanders and Lisa Kushner. They are with the Nature Conservancy and work with these programs. Carrie I've known for several years throughout the, and heard her speak about the development of the program in Ohio initially, and Lisa's newer to the Nature Conservancy, but we look forward to their comments about the program this morning. So I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. As I get this set up. All right, so, and is everybody seeing the screen correctly?
You're not in presentation mode yet, Carrie.
Okay.
There you go.
How's that? Excellent.
Yep, there you go.
So you'd think after, 9 months, we'd have this all figured out. Thank you all for coming today. It's great to be with you. I've been with the Nature Conservancy for about 10 years, and I'm the director of our ag engagement strategy. Lisa, who is with us, she's the soil and nutrient strategy manager and is from Minnesota. So we're going to be talking a little bit about how the 4R certification program is perceived publicly. And I just want to share a story with you. So I've been with the Nature Conservancy for 10 years. One of the things that I got to help do was help create and launch the certification program in Western Lake Erie Basin. And not only do I work there, but I also farm there in my, spare time with my parents and husband. And we work with a 4R certified provider to make our nutrient recommendations. And we were sitting down, this was last fall, with our CCA, and the crop advisor had made a recommendation for my dad on 2 of his fields to not really apply any phosphorus. And we actually farm in Western Lake Erie Basin. That's where all of our fields are. And it was really great. For those of you that work with multi-generational farms, you can understand and appreciate that sometimes when the younger generation makes a recommendation, the older generation is skeptical of the change. And it was the CCA explained to my dad that no, you really don't need any phosphorus. Your soil test samples, we zone sample, they're not showing any need for it. And you got to remember, Kenny, we're still in the Western Lake Erie Basin, and water quality is still an issue. So we don't want to over apply. And it was just, it was great to hear the CCA explain to my dad why he didn't need to apply more phosphorus. And it reminded me that, the CCA is making this recommendation, not only because it's the right science and it's right for the soil, but also it's the right thing to do for my dad. He didn't need to spend extra money on the phosphorus this last year. And he was also pleased with the yield. So at any rate, I'm really excited about how the certification program helps not only the retailers, and I'll explain that in a little while, how it helps the retailers publicly. It also helps the farmers understand, because the CCAs are explaining why and what needs to happen. So if you aren't familiar with the Nature Conservancy, just a brief background. We're a private nonprofit that works throughout the world. We work in all 50 states. We have a fantastic program in Minnesota, and then staff there also work in North Dakota and South Dakota. And we're really a science-based, pragmatic organization. We have a lot of scientists, PhD scientists working for us. I would consider myself a scientist, but no PhD. But everything that we do is based in science to not only help with biodiversity, but air quality, water quality, and you have some great staff. If you haven't met Leif Fixen, he's been very involved within the Minnesota chapter and the certification program. And I'll also say, we work with a lot of other companies. We have an MOU with the Fertilizer Institute to not only work together to support the 4Rs, but also on the science. And we have really appreciated the Mosaic Company and everything that they've done to support the 4Rs and the Nature Conservancy. We've worked really well with them over the years. So thank you, Adam and team. I just wanted to explain a little bit, as we work across North America, we have some, I would say, principles that we're going to support no matter what state that we're in and country. So this includes Canada. And I just want to point out that not only are we talking about soil health and continuous improvement, we're also talking about, native vegetation and keeping our grassland prairies. But we have really supported the 4Rs across the US, no matter what farming system that we're in. And we really appreciate TFI's work to advance the science and help get that out. Sally outlined a number of great informational pieces, getting the money and the finances and the environmental impact of the 4Rs is really important. So we appreciate all of that, and believe this is the right thing to do, not only for people, but also for nature. And when we think about environmental problems, there's a lot of a lot of folks out there that could tell you how they're going to be solved. And we would say that environmental problems are going to be solved by thinking a little bit differently. It's voluntary action that's really going to make a difference. Collaborating with others, having those hard conversations. Is the science the right science? You know, the 4R certification program is based on really good science. And then we also work with a number of organizations to better understand and integrate NRCS 590 standards, for example, or University of Minnesota recommendations for nutrient management. So, you know, it's not just a program that stands by itself. It is because of the collaboration and the conversations that the program is stronger because of all of the people that are involved. And, you know, environmental problems are because of a whole system of, you know, people integrating into a natural system and how they've impacted it differently. So it's not going to be just the agriculture industry. It's also going to be the manufacturing industry and the cities and the suburbs that are going to help solve this problem. And again, I say by thinking differently. So, you know, this picture in the bottom right, this is an ag retailer who, you know, essentially set up grids for their farmers, and they took their headlands, which is circled right down here, and they soil sampled those headlands differently, because when you think about how you harvest or plant the headlands, they are a little bit different than the rest of the field. You know, you turn around in them more, you have more traffic, maybe more compaction. So maybe the recommendation is a, you know, a different kind of cover crop there on the headlands, or a different sort of fertilizer incorporation on those headlands. And Sally touched on this. I just want to make sure that when we think about the certification program, we think about how many acres it has already impacted in its short tenure. So it started in 2014, just in the Western Lake Erie Basin watershed, and then has expanded beyond that. And, you know, even with Sally's number, this 3.8 million acres is old, and this was put together about 3 weeks ago. I don't believe there's any other program within the United States and Canada that impacts this many acres, to say we can certify these retailers are working with these farmers and getting the 4Rs implemented on 4.1 million acres across the US and Canada. That is huge. And I'm very excited to be able to say we're over 4 million. And we have counted and recounted so that we know that we're not double counting acres. We want to be as conservative as possible when adding up acres. But this is one of the reasons why, when you talk with, you know, whether it's state EPAs or departments of environmental quality, regional EPA programs, or even US EPA, the certification program is something that they really support for a number of reasons. One of which is they don't really want to regulate agriculture. They don't have the time, the capacity, the understanding, the nimbleness, understanding that, you know, agriculture from north to south or east to west is very different. So when the industry is proactive and saying, look, we know the right science for our region, and we're going to follow the 4Rs and make sure that we're keeping the fertilizer in the field and growing more crops, that is something that they get excited about. It was one of the deputies at US EPA, we were having a conversation, and she came to Ohio to learn more about the program, to see if there was any way the US EPA could support the program more. We'll see where this turns out, but I'm just very excited about this. Isn't just an industry program that nobody knows about. it has been publicly talked about, supported. Last week, on November 20th, Indiana had essentially their launch of their program. And not only was the lieutenant governor there, they had the governor there and 3 congressional representatives all supporting the program. So it's elected officials. We've got appointed officials that appreciate the proactiveness, the science-based nature, and the fact that so many groups have come together to support the right science and making sure that this is something that's workable for the industry. And in some cases, it's going to be a little bit of a stretch, you know? So it's it's been just really exciting to talk with, I would say, the partners of agriculture and the certification program. And I also want to just say thank you to NRCS and Departments of Agriculture and land grant universities, because a lot of the science that they have supported and done the research on has been helpful in creating the standard. And I'm going to turn it over to Lisa next. The one thing that I will say about other environmental groups is there has been quite a bit of support, not just from the Nature Conservancy, but other environmental groups, to say, the industry has gone above and beyond. And with it being a certification where there's an audit that takes place, they have that at a much higher standard when it comes to the credibility of the program, because it's not just a self-reported, yes, I'm doing that. Yes, we're following the 4Rs. Someone, a third-party auditor has come in and verified it. And that just adds so much credibility to the program for other environmental groups. And like I said, EPA, state departments of agriculture very much support this. So with that, Lisa.
Thank you, Carrie. Good morning. I'm Lisa Kushner. I'm with the Nature Conservancy's North America Agriculture Program, and I live here in Minnesota. I've been with the Conservancy for 10 years. Much of that time spent working with companies on water and agriculture issues. So we wanted to share a bit more on the public's perception of the 4Rs and associated work. And this webinar comes at a good time. The Conservancy worked with Edelman Data Intelligence, which is a very large, well-respected public communications and data firm, to publish a report about food, beverage, and agriculture companies and the green recovery in the context of the pandemic that's currently going on. And so this research interviewed close to 5,000 people worldwide. 600 of those were in the United States. And the audience there were 3 audiences: the public, leaders of food, beverage, and agriculture companies, so C-suite individuals, and then employees of those same food, beverage, and agriculture companies, looking at what are the priorities for these groups in terms of environmental sustainability in the context of the pandemic. Carrie, if you want to go to the next slide. So, even in the midst of a global pandemic and everything else that has happened in 2020, when you ask consumers, what are they like, what should food, beverage, and agriculture companies be focusing on? 73% of consumers have environmental sustainability either as a top 3 focus or overall important. So this is above nutrition and supply chain resilience and profitability. It's only behind safety concerns. So environmental sustainability continues to be increasingly important for the public and for those that are buying products from food, beverage, and agricultural companies. Next slide, Carrie. The research also asked the decision makers in the food and beverage and agriculture companies, both globally and by geography, what are your top concerns? So what are the top food system risks that you as a leader are worried about? And somewhat surprisingly, water pollution ranks higher than pandemic and disease. And this research was collected in September, so it's very current. Water pollution and climate change are two of the top three issues. And so companies know that they are expected by the public to continue making ambitious science-based commitments and following up on those. And as companies are making these commitments, they're looking to encourage practices that have multiple benefits. And we know that the 4Rs practices are practices that are science-based and have multiple benefits with regards to greenhouse gas emissions, water, farmer livelihood, and resiliency. And so these practices are going to be increasingly relevant, even in the midst of everything else that's going on right now. Carrie, next slide. And consumers are expecting that companies are being proactive in investing in sustainability and put more trust in companies that are being proactive. And we're seeing this in the increasingly ambitious commitments that are coming out of companies across the agricultural supply chain, both for climate change, water, regenerative agriculture as a whole. So here in our backyard in Minnesota, we've seen Cargill and General Mills come out with very high-level science-based targets for water and climate change that encourage the 4Rs practices. There's a lot of additional really good insights in this report, and we'll include a link to the report in the chat. So we see the 4Rs as being very relevant for a variety of public audiences like elected officials, food companies, and the public. And so with that, we'll open it up for questions of the next presenter. Thank you.
Thank you, both Carrie and Lisa. Are there any questions? I've not seen any in the box. So if you have a question, again, I'd encourage you to continue to put those in either chat or in Q&A, and we'll circle back and get to those. So we're moving right along, but I think we'll continue with the program. That way, if questions do come in later, we'll have plenty of time to address those. So next up, we're going to hear from Adam Hergis. And as we get ready to turn it over to Adam, I want to thank him. Adam is with the Mosaic Company and also was instrumental in bringing the 4R Field Day series to Minnesota 4 years ago. So this would have been our 4th annual Out in the Field Day. Many of you will remember that last fall in 2019, we held a field day at the Brian Ryberg farm in Renville County. And for those who were there, you might have recognized Brian. He was pictured in Sally's presentation as one of the 4R advocate farms. And so I want to thank Adam for his support for bringing this program to Minnesota. And during the last several years, we've worked as a advisory committee with Adam to help shape the program that we're learning more about today. So with that, I'll turn it over to Adam.
All right. Warren, can you see this?
Yes, I can. And actually, before you start, since you haven't actually gotten into it yet, we have one question. The question is, and I'll throw it back to all of our previous presenters. The question is water contamination an actual concern?
So I'll just make a comment. There are a lot of problems with water quality throughout the world, kind of depending on where you're at and where you get your water from. Water quality continues to be a concern in many areas. Some is surface water and some is groundwater, because groundwater the nitrogen can leach down and you can have excess nitrogen in the water. In fact, in California, they now have to test the water before they irrigate it because it has nitrogen in it. So they have to account for that when they irrigate. And I will say that the algal blooms haven't necessarily gone away. There's been other things that have been put in place so that maybe there's multiple sources or multiple areas where you can get water from, but algae blooms continue to be an issue, not just because of nitrogen and phosphorus from agricultural lands, but also, there's a lot of other sources. But there's just so much agriculture land in some areas that even, a pound of phosphorus from each acre can add up to have a huge impact on the water. So it is still a concern. There's more research going on all the time. Again, 4Rs is one of those things to help in field. There's other things going on to help figure out what we can do in ditches or streams to collect some of the phosphorus before it continues downstream. There's floodplains that are being, put in, wetlands, those sorts of like natural infrastructure that also can help, because, farm fields land is kind of a leaky system in and of itself. So following the 4Rs is going to help us get a long way to keeping those nutrients in the field. But there's also other things that we can do downstream. I don't know if anyone else has other information they want to share.
Yeah, thanks, Carrie. And are there any others who want to address that question? Okay, well, thank you for your answer, Carrie. I think certainly this is a very controversial topic about to the extent to which there are water quality problems and where they are and what's the cause of them. And in the work that we do here at the Minnesota Ag Water Resource Center, I think it's one of the complications that we've learned is that sometimes perceptions are a part of that problem. And we often see a perception that a problem exists in one place, therefore it exists everywhere. And so a lot of what we do in our Discovery Farms program is a key example of this, is trying to figure out, especially for farmers, under what settings or in which systems and in which parts of the state do you need to be concerned about certain elements or losses or water quality issues. Because if you're a farmer, you shouldn't need to be worried about every problem that occurs in the country or the world, but we think it's really important to know locally what are the things that you can do. And so I think it all comes back to what we're talking about today here with 4Rs. I would be hard pressed to find a farmer who didn't want to use nutrients as efficiently as possible. And that may be driven largely by economics, but I think there's very much growing recognition that there's an environmental benefit to it as well. And so I think we've come a long way in the last decades. So just my 2 cents on that topic. But with that, now if you're ready, Adam, I'll turn it back over to you.
All right. Thank you, Warren. Good morning, everyone. So I'm going to be talking about this exciting new launch of the 4R Nutrient Stewardship Certification Program here in Minnesota. My name's Adam Hergis, Senior Sustainability Agronomist with the Mosaic Company. I lead our 4R Nutrient Stewardship strategic partnerships in North America, but also am the chair of the Minnesota Nutrient Stewardship Council, which governs and oversees the program. So thank you to Carrie and Sally for talking a little bit about this program and where it started. I wanted to add a little bit more clarity to kind of show you the timeline of how this program came to be. So it's been on a journey over 8 years, starting in 2012, when the ag community and partners got together to talk about how they could address water quality concerns in the Western Lake Erie Basin. That program was launched 2 years later. In Minnesota, we started this process back in 2016 and had exploratory discussions about what we could do as an ag industry to address water quality concerns here in Minnesota. You know, there's a lot of, I think, conversations about who is really causing water quality issues and concerns. And I would say, you know, let's all work together because we all play a role in making sure that we have clean water for future generations. And with 4Rs, you know, it's something that can be managed properly in the field. We can address it through best science and practices. And really, if you're not addressing nutrient use and application, any sort of other conservation practices that you might have on the edge of field or within field or use of cover crops, they're not going to do much good. You need to really address and drive efficiency of your nutrient management to get the other sort of positive synergies of some of those other practices that can either, you know, control, avoid, or trap nutrients in the field. So in Ohio, they expanded it about 3 years after the launch of the Western Lake Erie Basin program. The next year in 2018, Ontario and New York launched the program. And then about a year later, Prince Edward Island and Florida also launched the program. And that is when, due to the expansion of this program in various states and internationally, the Global Council was formally established. And this year, we've launched the program in Minnesota and Indiana. Also want to touch on, you know, where are we seeing 4R engagement in North America specifically? And so, you know, you see in red here where the certification program is. Missouri will be hopefully launching their program next year. But you're seeing other areas where they are engaging, whether a 4R program like in Iowa called the 4R Plus program, which is a retailer education program, or in Canada where they have the 4R designation program, which is validating acres with CCAs at the retail level. So 4Rs is expanding. We hope to encourage more states to get involved, more of the ag community to get more involved. And hopefully we can start to, you know, really address water quality concerns when it relates to nutrient management. I want to provide a little bit of background in Minnesota. So I mentioned, you know, we started this exploration phase in 2016. We really had a large group of agricultural organizations and companies involved, about 25. We developed standards, right around 39 of them, but have reduced them to 32 standards, which we will be finalizing in the next 2 weeks. What really sort of brought this program forward was in September of last year, we conducted 4R pilot audits with 5 retailers across the state. And you can see with those stars where they're located, we really got a good sample of various soil types and cropping systems across our diverse state. And due to those pilot audits and some other reasons to really push the program forward, the Minnesota Crop Production Retailers Board approved adoption of this program to be the administrator. And so the council was formed about a month after that occurred this year. So what are the goals of our program here in Minnesota? I mean, first and foremost, we want to maximize nutrient use in cropping systems and minimize nutrient losses. And by doing so, we can increase grower profitability and optimize fertilizer efficiency. We want to make long-term positive impacts on water bodies. When you look at the water quality concerns in Minnesota, there's some legacy issues that will have to be addressed over time, but we also want to make sure that, we're using nutrients properly currently today and into the future. We want to strengthen those relationships between nutrient service providers and their grower customers. And we want to really just incorporate the most up-to-date science-based information around responsible nutrient stewardship to retailers, but also their growers. An overview of the program. So everybody always asks, what's the cost? What's it going to cost me to get involved in this program? And so retailers that are interested, it's a voluntary program, that are interested in 4R certification. There's going to be an annual admin fee of $900. There's going to be an $800 per audit. So these audits are done per location, not for the company. So each nutrient service provider's location, if they are interested in the program, would have to pay $800 per audit. And then also up to $300 for auditors' travel expenses. So when you look at how we are going to roll out this program, we're going to have an on-site audit in the first year that a retailer applies to become 4R certified. So that total cost could be up to $2,000. In year 2, there will be a remote audit required to maintain certification status. There'll be documentation that needs to be submitted. The auditor will also be working with the retailer in year 2 if there's specific standards that need to be addressed, or if there's a corrective action plan. And we're looking at roughly about, no more than $80 per hour as an hourly rate for the auditor in that year 2. And year 1, that will be a full day of an on-site audit. Year 2, looking anywhere from an hour to maybe 5 hours with the auditor and interaction with the retailer to make sure that they are making continuous progress. And then in year 3, we would have an on-site audit again. So that's sort of the cycle of the program here in Minnesota. The 4R structure. So what is the structure of this program? With Minnesota's Nutrient Stewardship Council, they're going to have 2 representatives serve on the global council. The program administrator is Minnesota Crop Production Retailers. So with Bill Bond as the executive director, he will be the administrator of the program. The Nutrient Stewardship Council that was formed this past March is an 11-member board. It's going to govern the program, and then it's going to create resources, educational materials, and recruit retailer participants. There's also a certification body. So this is out of the 11-member board, this will be 5 of the Nutrient Stewardship Council directors. But no agribusiness director can be on the certification body because this body is going to be reviewing audit reports and determine whether the retailer participants are following the program requirements to maintain or seek certification status. Auditors are independent contractors that have qualifications related to understanding nutrient management recommendations and agronomy, and they will be contracted with Minnesota Crop Production Retailer. And then there's also an advisory committee. So folks that are interested in, getting engaged with our program here in Minnesota, this is really an area where you can engage with the program, help support it. So the advisory committee is open to anyone that wants to be involved, and they will meet once a year. And really the objective of the advisory committee is to examine the standards in Minnesota and then provide recommendations to the council for approval. So we want to make sure that this program is current with the available science best practices that we have today, and that there's constant improvement of the program over time. So like I said before, Bill Bond is the executive director of MCPR, but also the executive director of the program. The 11-member body of the council, 5 of those seats are agribusiness. 3 of them are agency or university seats, and 3 of them are non-governmental organization. So on the right-hand side, you can see here the makeup of the council. These council members will serve a 3-year term and will not serve no more than a consecutive 2 terms. So folks will serve a total of 6 years potentially. We have representation from Central Soda, Ag Partners, Nutrien, West Central Ag, Mosaic, as well as Department of Agriculture here in Minnesota, the University of Minnesota, the Soil and Water Conservation District in Stearns County, Minnesota Corn, Warren with the Minnesota Ag Water Resource Center, and the Nature Conservancy. A part of the program are standards. So these are auditable standards, best practices. So right here in Minnesota, we have 32. They're incorporating the best available science on nutrient use efficiency, science that aids in reducing nutrient losses and also optimizing crop yields. They are going to touch on training, education, recommendation, application, and documentation. So these standards are really looking at the records, grower records of the retailer participants. It will be a randomized sample every other year for the on-site audit. But we are only auditing what the retailer has on record. There will not be any verification at the grower fields. So in order to get certification within the program here in Minnesota, you will need to meet all 32 requirements in year 1. If there are requirements that are not met, like the education component, not everybody is keeping records of 4-hour training for their sales folks. So those things are going to be a learning curve. But, so we will use corrective action plans to make sure that, we meet those standards over time. So for the process involved, certification is currently right now, it's for individual nutrient service provider locations here in Minnesota. The certification program in other states allow for independent crop consultants to become certified as well within the program. We are looking at that in Minnesota, but with our launch and rollout today, it's only going to be for retailers. Interested retailers may submit a first-year application and admin fee for intent to pursue status. Sort of the process there is MCPR will review the application, conduct follow-up visits with that retailer, address any questions that they may have. Sort of a pre-audit visitation is how we are calling it, prior to scheduling an actual on-site audit with the auditor. The audit process involved is here. I'm going to go a little bit more in depth to how the audit process occurs in Minnesota. So within the application for participating retailers that are interested in the program, here is sort of a list of information that is going to be required on the application. Most importantly is just a point of contact. If retailers are interested, who is that person that can be the point of contact at that location to work with MCPR and the Nutrient Stewardship Council, as well as the auditor. Retailers will be required to provide sort of a list of grower information. And so, obviously confidentiality is important with our program. So folks will, provide an identifier where the retailer knows which customers those are, but the auditor does not. But we like to get a good randomized sample of customer records in order to conduct the audit. So that will be required for the auditor to figure out who he wants to audit out of those grower records, and to make this as streamless as possible when the actual on-site audit occurs. So step one in the audit process, the application fee to MCPR indicating intent. Step two will be, a contract with an approved auditor. So these auditors will have a conflict of interest reviewed by Minnesota Crop Production Retailer, as well as provided to the participating retailer as well. So we want to make sure that there's no conflict of interest between the auditor and the facility. And then the auditor will actually directly schedule that on-site audit with the retailer. So, right now with most workload throughout the year, it's seasonal, likely winter and maybe after planting season is done is likely when on-site audits will occur. But that's really going to be up to the auditor and the retailer involved. So the actual audit will occur. So through the audit planning and a progress report, working with the auditor will, send the audit plan, which will include an agenda of what the on-site audit will be, a description of the scope of the audit, contact information of that auditor, and then a list of documentation that will need to be sent in advance. So to make it as streamless as possible, like I said before, a list of growers that are not identifiable, yet the retailer knows who they are to keep confidentiality. All information from the retailer that's used in the audit will stay at the retailer facility. The auditor will just have a spreadsheet. We're hoping to move this to an online platform, like Sally mentioned earlier. But really, they're just going to evaluate with that randomized sample, are they following the 32 standards here in Minnesota? So no evidence, no documentation will leave the retailer facility that is confidential for that facility. So the audits will take about 8 hours, likely up to 8 hours, a full day. The auditor will review the records, the grower records, and evaluate it against the 32 standards. They may also have conversations with agronomists on staff, fertilizer sales folks, as well as the general manager to address some of the other standards that are involved with training and education of staff, etc. Upon completion of the audit, the retailer involved, the nutrient service provider, will receive an invoice from MCPR for that actual audit. So the auditors will have 30 days to complete the audit report. So this is utilizing the auditor spreadsheet to draft the report. This report will go to the retailer, and also Minnesota Crop Production Retailers as the administrator. Those are all kept confidential between the program administrator and the retailer and the auditor. Then that information will be shared with the certification body, members of the Nutrient Stewardship Council, those 5 members. If there's non-conformity with some of the standards, those will be addressed. So this is really about building trust between the auditor, the administrator, and the participating retailer. We want to see, improvement and progress that is being demonstrated over time. Some of these may include a corrective action plan, where it will be basically, a document between the auditor and the participating retailer where they will look at, okay, what standards were not met, what were maybe the reasons why, what are some of the actions that will be taken, so that the next time an on-site audit occurs, that there is some progression and improvement related to those standards. And so that's really a contract between the auditor and the retailer to show improvement over time. And then there'll be a certification decision. So the 5-member council members that are part of the certification body will review and provide a recommendation to the Nutrient Stewardship Council. The Nutrient Stewardship Council will then make a final decision on certification of the participating retailer. The post-certification actions. So there, in year 2, the on-site audit year, there will be annual documentation that will be required. There may be follow-up between the auditor and the participating retailer to address or sort of a status update on where they are with some of those standards that may have not been met, and to see that progression over time. And then there'll be sort of a final invoice sent to the participating retailer post audit and post certification approval. So that's sort of the audit process involved with the program here in Minnesota. I kind of wanted to go through those details so that people understand what this program is. The 32 standards will be on the MCPR website under the 4R Nutrient Stewardship Program soon. We are in the process of finalizing that as a council due to the fact that we had a public comment period back in July through September, and addressing some of those public comments and revisions to the standards so that we can finalize that, get that out the door, and we can start conducting audits hopefully this winter. We do, however, have a frequent answering questions document. This program is certified in locations, not companies. It's an important distinction. And once certification is achieved, that location will have the ability to use the 4R logo, certification logo, brand that logo with their location. There'll be signage. We are going to be doing a full court press on a press release, including recognition annually at the MCPR, hopefully trade show, when we're not dealing with COVID issues, and we can actually be in person. Also, we want to get recognition in the local newspaper. As we start to build some of the metrics around this program, like what Sally touched on before, we want to advocate with our public officials and the public about what we're doing to address water quality concerns from an agricultural perspective, right? We all play a role here. There's multiple nutrients that affect water bodies, multiple different sources, but we want to do our part. So with that, I want to thank you all today for joining and listening to me talk about the kind of nuts and bolts of the program. If you have questions, here's really the folks that have been on the front lines of this program. Bill Bond is the executive director of MCPR. Also, the Nature Conservancy has played an intricate role. So Peter Mead, who is brand new, working with Lath, is helping with the program, and then myself as well as chair. So if you have questions, please direct them towards the folks here. Warren, I will give it back to you.
All right.
We'll answer any questions that people may have in the chat.
Yes, perfect. So thank you, Adam. That was very good. And there are a few questions that have shown up in the Q&A box. There's quite a few of them actually. And so I'm going to kind of walk us through that. And so first couple of nuts and bolts questions. Exactly who is getting certified? Is it the farmer getting certified or the nutrient supplier getting certified, or both?
Good question. It's actually the retail location. So the nutrient service provider is the one that's receiving certification.
Okay.
But but obviously the, the recommendations and continually giving that, feeding in the best science available to address not only yield, but also nutrient loss, that will filter down to the grower as well.
Okay, thank you. Next question. How does this program relate to the Minnesota Ag and Water Quality Certification Program offered by the Minnesota Department of Agriculture?
Really good question. We've talked a lot about that in our exploratory phase as we were looking at this program and bringing it to Minnesota. It really complements the Department of Ag certification program that's for farmers. So a lot of the education components there that they are looking at in certifying on a field by field basis with a grower are some of the same components that we have in this program. And so we've been in discussions with the Department of Ag about, how could we leverage both programs together? And those discussions are taking place, and future discussions will happen as well.
Okay, thank you. What is the motivation for farmers to sign on to the program? Is it mostly about recognition or cost savings?
For retailers, farmer buy-in, I think it would be both. Recognizing cost savings and driving profitability, utilizing 4Rs. From a retailer perspective, it's really to show and create that transparency with the public about what we're doing. I think it's important that retailers get recognized for all the good work that they have been doing in demonstrating best practices with growers. And so let's have a program where we can show that. And then, have systems in place for continuous improvement as well. So as new science becomes available, how do we then integrate that quickly and get that information out to the growers through the ag retailers?
Okay, very good. Thank you. I got to make sure I stay on top of this. Okay, then does the grower need to consent in order for their data to be used in the program?
Yes, there will be a documentation on that that the retailer can have discussions with growers. Also, some of the standards are going to require a grower signature. So that will be documented as well. So there'll be a discussion with the grower. But yes, if those issues come up, we'll address them.
Okay. Next one's a little more detailed. Recognizing the tensions between government relation and corporate innovation and how we respond. This person wonders to what extent government subsidies should be contingent on verification of 4R and soil health principles. More bluntly, should taxpayer funds be used to support farms, large and small, that are not actually demonstrating good nutrient usage and stable carbon soil health? Should USDA programs be providing funds to support farmers to do this sort of work in the 4R area? Perhaps pay the $2,000 that a retailer firm would roughly have involved in the program. So
that's a good
question.
That's a good. Yeah, that's a good policy question. I think we've started to see that over time with some of the latest farm bills where they've been tying conservation compliance to payments, USDA payments to growers, even looked at, crop insurance. I don't know where that's going to go. It seems like those conversations come up every time we have a change in administration at the federal level. We are looking at ways where we could probably utilize some public funding to cover the costs of retailers participating in the program. Those discussions are kind of occurring right now. One of the things we looked at is if there's a way for retailers to promote the Ag Certainty program to their growers and get them signed up, could there be a mechanism in place where that covers the costs of either their administration fee or their auditor fee for participating in this program? So that's one thing that we're looking at as well.
Yeah, very, very, very good. And thank you. I know that was kind of a big, complicated question, but thank you for your response. Another question, and this one, we may come back to this one with some of the other presenters as well, so just kind of a heads up to them. But are we getting to the point where there are actual scientific metrics that are gold standards that can show what is happening at the farm level? And I know this was some of the discussion that in developing those 32 standards, you know, what do we know? And I think that's really the basic question.
Yeah. So I think as you look at some of the small plot work research that's going on, and maybe some of the watershed type field research that's going on, we know that practices, you know, have a potential to reduce nutrient losses based on certain climatic conditions, right, or weather patterns. So we know that there is the science is supporting that. I think what we have less understanding of is how much of those practices do we need on the landscape? You know, what's the saturation point for us to, you know, probably not likely reduce nutrient losses to zero. That's not going to happen because we're dealing with more frequent and intense rainfall events. You know, those storms are dropping 2-inch per hour rates. But how do we, you know, build the resiliency to, you know, reduce nutrient losses as much as we can? And really, when I look at what we're doing here with this program, but then the 4 R's in general is, you know, it starts with management, and it's some of it can be as simple as tweaking the way you apply nutrients versus those capital investments where new equipment might be needed. But let's start with what we can control and work towards that. And then, you know, whether the science tells us later on that things change, we will be flexible. But let's start with what we can control, and let's not deal with what we can't control. And we can't, you know, control weather patterns and these 500-year or 1,000-year storms, but we can deal with what we can do with the products we use and how we apply them in the field.
Very good, thank you. Next question. Are the 32 standards largely those performance standards from the IPNI, or have they been modified or added to?
Yeah, so the 32 standards, you know, they really cover the main areas of the program that the Global Council has set up. So training, education, recommendation, application, and documentation. They're going to be specific to the soil types and cropping systems we have here in Minnesota. So the standards are going to look different. From an IPNI standpoint, yes, they do cover a lot of the science and research that they have brought to the industry over the last several decades. But some of the standards are going to incorporate some new information that we've had since then as well. So yes and no.
Okay. And this next one is a little more specific, and so you may be familiar with this or not, but this questioner had previously worked in ag retail in Colorado and suggests that this program, that they participated in the Responsible Ag program, and suggests that this program seems somewhat similar to that. Are you familiar with Colorado's Responsible Ag program, working with them perhaps, or is this completely different?
So this is slightly different. The Responsible Ag, and I believe that's the program that's talking about where there's certification of a retail facility, but that was really as a result of the West Texas explosion at the ammonium plant. And so that was, you know, really addressing safety concerns around nitrogen handling and storage and use. Where this program is looking at the actual nutrient recommendations that retailers provide to grower customers. So if that's what the Responsible Ag that they were talking about, yes, that's a distinction there.
Okay, thank you. And perhaps if not, perhaps the questioner can clarify and rephrase a little bit. And then the last question I have in the box at this point, will farmers working with a certified NSP be able to claim certification to their customers?
So is that potentially tying this program to the Minnesota Ag Water Quality Certification Program? I would assume
It's unclear, but I think you could assume that.
Yeah. So that's sort of the thing that we're exploring with the Department of Ag. So if we have retailers that are 4R certified under this program, what are the benefits of that? Is there going to be potentially some policy considerations there? So we're going to be looking at that with the government. But also as it ties to the grower certification that the Department of Ag is their program that they roll out, could there be more of a streamlined process for those grower customers to get certification status there as well? Because they do have regulatory certainty with that program, whereas our program does not. But we will be having those discussions over time.
Okay, and perhaps this might help clarify a little bit. Will a farmer who is part of this program through his retailer be able to use the 4R brand and logo?
So that might be a question for Sally, since TFI manages the 4R branding and logo.
Yeah,
Sally,
can
I don't,
answer
if
that.
you want to address
Yeah,
that.
at this point in time, the answer would be no. They would have to work with TFI directly to get the licensing rights to be able to use either 4R Stewardship Certification logo or just a 4R logo. And some of that's participating in our partner program, and some of that is letting us know how you plan to use that logo on a product or piece of material.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else?
Just real quick, I will say that some retailers have put up farm signs on the fields, on the farms that they actually, give advice on and spread the fertilizer for. So it can say, proudly supported by 4R certified facility with your, ag retail logo on it. So that's some things that other retailers have done. So it's not necessarily the farmer using it, but it does kind of identify the farmer with that retail location. So that could be an option.
Okay, thank you for that, Carrie. And also thanks, Carrie. You might notice in the chat section that Carrie has added a couple of web resources relative to the science and the evidence of how the 4Rs are impacting the environment. So I'd point you over to that as well. And with that, I think we're going to move into the next part of our discussion. And I think many of you, maybe this is what you were really waiting for, was hearing from some ag retailers about how the program is really going to work and what their experience has been. And so to kick off this next section, I want to introduce Bill Bond. Bill is the executive director of the Minnesota Crop Production Retailers, and they are the group that will be administering this program. And so for the next half hour or so, 45 minutes, I'm going to ask Bill to moderate the discussion with some of the folks who are actually going to be doing this program. So Bill.
Thank you, Warren, and excellent program so far. It's an exciting new venture, and as you have heard, I took on a new title and a new responsibility just this year. However, the Minnesota Crop Production Retailer has been around for 60 plus years, and we've been in this business of promoting the proper use, storage, and application of not only fertilizer, but pesticides and other crop production inputs in an environmentally safe and agronomically and a sound manner as far as agronomy is concerned. And we support regulatory and legislative initiatives which benefit retailers, manufacturers, and distributors, and custom applicators of crop inputs. We also tend to oppose those regulations and legislative initiatives that do not. And that's really the motivation for MCPR looking at this whole question of how do we show accountability to those who would like to regulate and legislate us in these crop inputs. And so we have been involved in asking that question, even to the point of creating our own environmental regulatory environmental responsibility system that we evaluated, and frankly found that it was too narrow a focus when this broader 4R program was coming into being, you probably remember that when Lake Erie was showing some real pollution to the point that Cleveland had to shut down their water supply, it got everybody's attention. And just one other comment, then Minnesota has sourcing issues for water. We're the source of the Mississippi River. And of course, we know about the Mississippi River pollution and even down into New Orleans and the Gulf of Mexico. We also are the sourcing in the Red River Valley for Lake Winnipeg, and we know that they have issues as well. So groundwater and surface water, in fact, we're called the land of 10,000 lakes. It's probably more like 15,000. But the point is, water and agriculture is an interface we cannot avoid. I've often said the world is, there's either people who are watching and saying what's going on, or people that are not paying attention, and MCPR has been paying attention. So with that, I want to introduce the panel, and they're all, I serve under them as executive director. The first is Rick Walker, and Rick is with West Central Ag. And that's really the merger of, some of you remember Triangle Ag Services and West Central. When they merged, they're located in northwestern Minnesota, and of course they go into the Dakotas as well. And Rick is the crop production department manager. And then we have Amy Rollback Bruce. Amy is with Central Soda Co-op. They're just up the road from where I live in Buffalo, Minnesota. They're in the central Minnesota area, and Amy is the lead nutrient management specialist and a crop advisor. And then we have Andy Owning. Andy is the nutrient ag solutions manager in Big Lake, and Nutrin is probably the world's largest provider of crop inputs and services, and they have been involved in this for some time. So with that, I just say welcome to each of you, and why don't each of you take just about a minute and describe your role a little bit more specifically. Let's start with you, Rick.
My name's Rick Walker. I work for West Central Ag, located in northwest Minnesota, based out of Ulen, Minnesota. I'm in charge of crop production, which would include chemical, seed, and some of the specialty fertilizer, and involved in sales management. We do business in Minnesota, North Dakota, and parts of South Dakota.
And Rick, you like to hunt and fish. Did you get a deer this year?
I did not shoot a deer this year.
Okay, so Bammy's still safe.
Yep.
Okay, and Amy, why don't you describe a little more specifically your position with Central Soda?
Yeah, so I'm Amy Roebuck Bruce. I work with Central Soda. So our territory, as a co-op, we cover the central Minnesota area, a little bit into Wisconsin. My role is kind of twofold. So I work as the nutrient management specialist and as a crop advisor. So I not only do that, we work with the sustainability program too within the co-op. And I'm also certified a technical service provider within the Natural Resource Conservation Service for doing nutrient management plans and pest management and irrigation water management plans. So my role takes me across the whole entire state. So within the co-op, we do the nutrient management planning, we write the government contracts, we help with sustainability, soil health. Of course, and the precision side comes into it too. So this is a new department division within Central Soda that started about 3 years ago now. So it's kind of keeps growing and keeps snowballing into something bigger every year.
And Amy, you for hobbies, you list camping and farming as a hobby. That's interesting, and spending time hiking. Where did you last camp?
It's been a while since COVID, but the last time we went out was camping along the Mississippi River up north.
Cool.
Tasca.
Very good, very good. Okay, Andy, with Nutrin Ag Solutions, why don't you describe your position a little bit more specifically?
Yeah, good morning, Bill. Andy Oding with Nutrient Ag Solutions. I'm the location manager in Big Lake, which is just northwest of the Twin Cities.
the location that I work at covers about a 60-mile radius around Big Lake, which includes the Northwest Metro, the Anoka Sand Plain right along the Mississippi River. So we're working with vulnerable watersheds kind of in this area already. So it was another reason why I wanted to be a part of this program. Recently, I kind of have taken a new position with Nutrien, and I'm working with all 20 stores in Minnesota as a marketing manager. So the ability for me to get to all our stores and bring this message on a broader scope for Nutrien in Minnesota, it just was a natural fit. So that's it.
Fantastic. And of course, Rick and Andy are on the board of MCPR, and Amy is on the board of the Minnesota Nutrient Stewardship Council. And that's new this year to us. We just started in 2020. We've been looking at this issue of water and agriculture since I started 16 years ago, if you can believe. And one of the challenges we have is that we aren't always on the same page with the University of Minnesota standards, I have to admit. And as a result, when he's talking about standards, retailers get a little anxious about what are you going to say about how much nitrogen I'm going to get to apply. And so those are issues that have been of interest as we've looked at this for our certification. We have concluded in Minnesota that we need a national and an international standard. And we are also seeing that focusing on fertilizer is a much bigger issue than it was 16 years ago when I started. Used to be everything was pesticides, pesticides, pesticides. And now it seems like fertilizer and the water quality issues are huge. So with that, let me just start with you, Rick. What are the reasons you're participating in the 4R certification program?
I think one of the biggest reasons is we need to be on the front end to help manage some of the groundwater concerns that keep coming up. It seems that if we're not going to address some of that, you'll see increased regulation on what can be applied, when it can be applied, and how it's applied. So I think some of this needs to be documented to show that the proper application is being done right now, currently, and to produce good metrics to show that the groundwater contamination is limited to some extent with the application procedures that are being used. That's one of the biggest reasons to look at this program.
That's an excellent point, Rick. And in fact, one of the things I ran into right away in talking about water quality and some kind of standardized documentation and recording was, well, in Minnesota, we do a lot of precision ag and we document and we have specific metrics that we share with our growers. Then the question about, well, yeah, but how do we standardize that so we can report it in some consistent fashion? That's when it got a little tougher. And that's where I think the role of the 4R certification started making sense. Let's go to Amy. What is your motivation in your position for participating?
You know, I think it's the 4R certification within CentraSoda as we proceed at our locations is just a natural fit in the way the company is viewing sustainability and our active role within Land O'Lakes with the sustainability programs and things like that. And a lot of this, as we look through the standards, a lot of our agronomists and our farmers, they're participating in. A lot of them are within government programs. And this is just a really good way for us to start to document some of that stuff. And I think it's just, farmers have been asking for it. And this is just a good way for the co-op to take that approach, that first leap, I guess, in doing some of this stuff and helping our producers become more sustainable themselves.
Excellent. And Andy, Nutrien, man, they're a giant. What is the rationale or the reasoning for you guys getting involved here in Minnesota and within Nutrien?
Well, kind of to go along with what Rick and Amy said, it's a natural fit for our business already. It's things that we're kind of focusing on to begin with. And as a person that manages a ag retail location, I feel like I'd be doing my customers and my coworkers a disservice if we weren't working towards these standards and trying to bring sustainability to the forefront. We talk about it more and more every day of sustainability, carbon footprint, all those words become more prevalent in our vocabulary. And that's why this program just fits to my personal beliefs and our company's beliefs.
You know, that gets to something else that I hear concerns about, and that is a third-party audit. It's kind of like, what's involved here? So I guess I'd go back maybe and ask whoever, maybe Rick, start with you, but what is your view of the audit? How tough is it? And is it something that people are going to really have a hard time dealing with?
I think the audit procedure, the first time through, is fairly difficult. It requires pulling a lot of information, which, you know, and we went into it not knowing exactly what we needed. The first time, I think, with better prep, I think you could pull some of that information for the person. And I mean, the information is there in a lot of cases at a lot of companies throughout the state. It's just bringing all that information together in one spot. So, I mean, we went through the pilot audit, took about, I think, 4 hours. And it was surprising the amount of information we actually had available right on hand. And some of it we had to go find. But I think it's just a process that over time will get easier and easier as you get more ingrained into this type of program, because we're already doing a lot of the stuff to document it. It's just having it all in one place that's accessible.
Yeah. And Amy, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so we haven't gone through an audit process yet at the co-op, but kind of to mimic what Rick was saying, you know, we have the information. It's just, where do we store it so it's readily available? You know, how do we store it so we can pull that information quickly when the audit comes? A lot of the stuff is documented. And of course, like every co-op out there, you have 10 different programs that we use for precision agriculture. So how do we gather all that information into one local place that's easy, not only for our crop advisors to access, but also, you know, when the audit comes about.
And Andy, man, how difficult is the audit process? And are people afraid, my gosh, I'm going to fail this thing? I mean, you're part of a large organization across the country and around the world. What was your reaction to the audit, and how difficult do you think it is?
Well, I guess when we went through the pilot audit last September, kind of opened my eyes that as we were just kind of initially dipping our feet into this 4R thing, that we were probably already following a lot of the principles of the 4R to begin with. So it became initially less intimidating right away as we went through this pilot audit. Now, to kind of go off what Rick said, it is a lot of information gathering, record keeping, and things that we'll probably have to fine tune, but working through the 4R and having this corrective action plan that allows you to kind of circle back around and complete some of these items after your audit occurs is really, it allows for a lot of flexibility, even as long as you're kind of showing that you're working towards the standards initially to begin with.
And I thought it was interesting. One of the questions was, how does it compare to responsible ag? And I thought I'd just jump in on that. Minnesota had a pretty significant role to play in responsible ag. We had actually developed a program related to regulatory compliance, and that's the difference between the responsible ag and a certification score. If anybody was involved in that or is anticipating, that program requires a percentage of 70% or better in order for you to get the certification. This is a little different. This program, the 4R certification, looks at the standards and how you are related to those standards in those sample fields and farms that the auditor selects, and then how you correct that as part of the corrective action plan. But going through the process gives you a certification. when you sign up to participate and go through the effort of this process for the fields that the auditor picks out. So it's a different program, but it points to the voluntary and I think responsible way to climb the ladder toward an agricultural reporting of how we're doing against standards that are generally accepted. So it seems to me that we're onto something here. But one of the questions that I have then is, okay, what if a grower is not familiar with this program, and all of a sudden you're starting to talk to them about permission to use data and 4R certification? How are the grower customers accepting it, or what might be the impediments? Let's try with you, Amy, first of all.
Yeah, that's always the challenge. There's some growers that are really open about it. You know, a lot of times it's just sitting down with them and discussing what's going to be shared with whom. And some growers, and it seems with the group of people that I work with, some of the larger dairy operations sometimes get a little bit leery about sharing some of that information. But it's something that, you know, if we have to participate in the program, that we have to talk through, we're going to have to work through. You know, it's the other thing I see too is I feel like, and some of the growers are starting to realize too, that if we start to share our story and share what we're doing and maybe start giving some of those permissions out there, that maybe the regulatory things won't come in down the line. So they see that side of it too. So that kind of plays into the data sharing too thing, is sharing their story.
Yep. Rick, any thoughts on customer reaction to this?
You know, I was initially worried about how the customers would react to it. I talked to quite a few about it before we started to go down this process, and I was actually pleasantly surprised after discussing some of it with them. I think a lot of them know that you know, they need to start doing something. I mean, there's so many other programs out there they can qualify for, that if they're showing they're doing the correct thing with the fertilizer, it opens up other avenues to qualify for different grants, different funding. And it was some of the stuff they were looking at, and this program kind of pushed them down the road towards doing some of those things. And I think they're really aware of, they need to tell their story and how they're producing that crop and what they're doing to produce it in an efficient manner. I mean, because if you look at agriculture right now, it's not about spending more money to make less money. They're all trying to do something in the most efficient fashion that they can. So I was really surprised at their reaction and how open they were to doing some of the stuff that was required in this program and moving forward with it.
You know, I have worked with Warren for many years on looking at standards. I think of the Ag Water Quality Certification Program, which grew out of the groundwater concern and the wells that had been tested, and the nitrate issues in the water. And it just was interesting to me that as soon as somebody even suggested something to a grower, you had to run ahead of them to even document it, because they were already done and they were doing it across their fields. There's an innovation attitude that that is very encouraging, and something I think speaks so well of agriculture, that the growers are really ready to respond with innovation and apply it when it works and it makes sense to them, to their fields, and they've been very positive to this. How about you, Andy? Any thoughts you have about the grower side of this, and any concerns?
Yeah, sure, Bill. I think our growers were pretty darn open to exploring this. A lot of them, or a handful of them, we kind of live along a sand plain locally, and we've dealt with some voluntary well monitoring for nitrate levels and working with some other MDA initiatives. So they're familiar with what's coming. A lot of them are already Minnesota Water certified. So they're looking for other feathers to put in their cap. They kind of take a lot of pride and showing that they're good stewards of the land. As we get generationally diverse and some of these younger folks are coming in and taking over farm organizations, they understand that they have to remain sustainable as they step into somebody else's shoes. And even the older generations want to leave that mark for their people that are taking over for them. So it's been really well received, I guess, to answer the original question.
And it seems to me this has been a process. I remember when the public waters inventory took place many, many years ago. I was a county commissioner in Dodge County back then. And so we as county commissioners invited the DNR down to our high school and invited any of the public that were interested to talk to the DNR about the public water inventory. You'll remember they declared public waters and identified them on maps. I was shocked. The auditorium was full of growers, and the growers were very concerned about the way that their water, their fields had been identified as public. And unfortunately, that created a lot of resistance to government and those kind of programs that identified waterways and identified public water. But I think since that time, we've all become aware of the fact that in agriculture, we have to be responsive and tell our story. I think Rick put it really well. We need to tell our story, because if we don't, our critics are already telling it for us, and it isn't pretty when they talk about it. So I think this is where I want to just give you a chance to say, the environmental concerns, have you had interactions, either any three of you on the panel, with either growers or critics of growers in your area who are criticizing the environmental impact that they have on either a nearby field or nearby waterway? Have you had a negative interaction with people about the crop inputs and your services? Why don't you go ahead, Rick? Have you had that?
Yeah, I think I definitely have to some extent. And I think some of it is, just the misinformation that's out there in a lot of cases on how it's actually being done.
Yep.
And it seems like if it's approached in a way where you communicate with them and discuss the processes that they're taking, that they aren't just spreading a lot of fertilizer just to spread it, and they're trying to do the most economical thing they can. I think it's surprising how there's just so much misinformation out there right now.
Yep. I think Rick, I was with a couple of farm groups together, and I mentioned that I was with the retailers, and kind of, well, yeah, what they do, they try and sell as much fertilizer and spread it as they can because they make more money. And I thought, oh man, that's not the image I want to talk about or represent. And so maybe Amy, talk about, have you had any critics in your area, and how might this program address their concerns?
Yeah, it's I deal with it, I think, on a daily basis in my position, and I sit on a lot of different groups. I work in the Little Rock watershed, and that's kind of been the target hotspot, it seems like, with the DNR and what they're working there with the irrigators. So there's a lot of misinformation out there. It's a lot of uneducated people that don't understand agriculture as a whole and what farmers are trying to do, not only to protect the environment, but what's economical for them. So this program, what I'm really hoping is hopefully take the spotlight maybe off of them a little bit, and even off the co-ops as a whole, and say, hey, we are doing things, we're helping our producers be sustainable, and walking them through that process, and sharing that story, and telling the farmer story, and telling the co-op story too.
That's excellent. Andy, any thoughts you have about the environmental concerns and critics in your area?
Yeah, kind of similar to everybody else. We run into it quite frequently, especially being right on the edge of the metro and dealing with some of these farmers that are getting kind of engulfed by housing and development. And seems like we spend a fair amount of time educating the public on a one-to-one basis when they confront maybe an applicator or a grower. And So we're already kind of out there doing it. It's a good message to tell, because like has already been said, if we don't tell our story, somebody else will maybe tell it for us, and that's really not what we're looking for here. And yeah, so
You know, that is, it's been said that there are those that watch what happened. There are those who make things happen, and then there's those who say, "What happened?" And I'm hopeful. It's kind of the 20-80 rule. 20% of the folks make the changes, do the work, and the 80% benefit. So who we're talking with right here are some of the leading ag retailers. We have already had 4 different locations identified that they want to start the process. We have at least another 6 that are ready to step up. So we know that we're going to have just under a dozen facilities that will be starting the audit. And we have selected an auditor. Many of you know Matt Weavers with CropCentric. Matt has been interfacing with our for our leadership across the country. He's been trained by some folks in Ohio, and he will be our auditor to begin with. We're anticipating that as this grows, we'll have others auditing as well. But we're confident. We've worked with him for some time on a number of programs, and he's a good source for us as far as the audit. Let me kind of wrap it up by saying, what are the biggest concerns you have about the program as it's developing? And maybe we'll start with you, Andy. What are you concerned about? What do you think might be a problem we need to avoid?
well, I don't know if there's any glaring problems. We've spent a heck of a lot of time developing this program, getting the standards to be achievable in Minnesota. Probably initially the biggest hurdle is going to be the paperwork, the documentation, the education, getting everything in line the way that the standards require. I think that's really the biggest hurdle. And I think if we saw worse problems than that as we were developing it, it wouldn't be at the stage that it's at today.
Excellent. Amy, any concerns about the program as it develops?
I think there's not, like Andy said, there's not any major concerns. I think the biggest hurdle for us as a co-op is getting everyone on the same page and making sure we are hitting those standards, creating those plans with those producers and documenting things. So it might be a learning curve maybe for our crop advisors to do. And then of course, getting all the information in one place that's easy accessible for everyone to use. And then of course, that's for the audit. So just some more internal hurdles I think that we have to get over first.
And Rick, any concerns you have? You mentioned some that you had initially. What are your concerns going forward with this program?
I think, just to recap what everyone else said, I think it's just getting the initial documentation done, and I think it's going to be more internal than, I think the program's pretty close to ready to go.
Okay.
So I mean, it's the documentation part's going to be the biggest hurdle.
So I see we have just a couple minutes left on our schedule, so let me give you one final chance. There's a number of retailers on this webinar, and they're wondering, should I do it? Should I get started? Starting with you, Rick, would you recommend the program and why?
I think it's something that any retailer in the state that's concerned about increased regulation and agriculture in general needs to move forward on something like this. I think it's a great opportunity to learn more about the standards, learn more about water quality, and probably help educate their staff in the proper way to use fertilizer to produce the biggest economic return for their farmer and still be good for the environment. So I definitely recommend moving forward on it.
Amy?
Yeah, I think it's nice that you can go location by location to get certified. So if a co-op wanted to start, they can start maybe with 1 or 2 locations and then see how it goes, get the process down. But I'd highly encourage it. Being involved with a lot of different things across the state and seeing on different groups, there's going to be regulatory things that are going to come down the line in the next potential 5 years. And this is a great way for us to maybe start to curve that ball a little bit and hopefully maybe lessen some of them or totally dissolve some of them, and just hopefully change the mindset of legislators and the general public of what farmers are doing.
Thank you. And how about you, Andy?
Yeah, I totally agree. At this this time and my involvement with this process, I would definitely recommend it. I think that competition and co-workers alike, we're all striving for the same goal, or we sure should be. And I see this potentially becoming as a differentiator in our marketplace too, to say that you are 4R certified and you are a good steward of the land. And I think it's going to be a great feather in anyone's cap, and it just goes back to personal values, even to anyone that wants to be a part of this thing.
Well, with that, Warren, I'll just say it's a pleasure to be working with you. Warren, of course, is also on the council, to whom I report on this program. And we are off and running in the sense that we've raised money, and we've raised about $67,000 already for this program. The program is going to have a budget of $150,000. Some of that's, and it's on its way to being self-sustainable. The fees hopefully are going to cover the costs of the project as it develops. But we've got a good start, good leaders, and glad to have had a chance to shed a little more light on it. Back to you, Warren.
Well, thank you, Bill, and thank you to Amy, Andy, and Rick for your comments this morning. I think that was very helpful. I do have a couple of questions that have come in, and so I guess the first one, perhaps, Bill, you can answer. Statewide, based on what you've seen so far, is there a good distribution of retailers that would be doing audits this coming year?
There are. I think, as you saw on the map that Warren presented as to where the pilot projects are, we have a good, I think, distribution of interest expressed from the Red River Valley right down to southeastern Minnesota. And of course, any of you that know the geography of the state, there's a lot of difference between the karst topography in southeastern Minnesota as compared with the Red River Valley and the Central Plains and southwest Minnesota. So yeah, I think we have a good distribution.
Okay, good. Well, and you mentioned the variation across the state, so that leads us into our next question. And I'll leave this one not just for you and the panelists, because I know you all would be familiar with the content of the 32 standards, but also perhaps invite Adam to step back in and help with this one as well. But the question is, how do you propose balancing national and international standards with local differences? Within ag, the one size fits all thing doesn't fit well at all with us. So, and is very much resisted. So how will you balance those standards to respond to local factors?
I'll take a stab at that because I think it might have been directed towards the presentation on the program. This program has sort of the framework and the template to set it up in various states or regions. But the standards are going to be state specific, soil type specific, cropping system specific. So that's how we're dealing with it. Because yes, I totally agree with the commenter that one size does not fit all. We've seen that time after time with certain sort of legislation that has been rolled out or consideration of potential policy or law. So yes, one size does not fit all, but within this program, we have the flexibility to deal with the various geographies across Minnesota. And the standards here in Minnesota are not the same as the standards in other states like Indiana, Missouri, Ontario, Ohio. Some of them are very similar, but they're not the exact same.
Yeah, so for our global council has identified the principles and those remain the same, but then it's up to the individual state to create the standards based on, state and local specific guidance. So like the University of Minnesota standards are used heavily in the new Minnesota program. And the local NSC council comes up with the standards, which then the global 4R's council approves. So it is very much meant to be appropriate for your location.
Very good. Anyone else care to comment? Well, I'm going to jump back in, and so our University of Minnesota and research and science around 4Rs has been talked about quite a bit. And so I just want to mention a couple of other opportunities. The Minnesota Ag Water Resource Center with the Department of Agriculture and the University of Minnesota, many of you on the call have participated in the nutrient management conferences that we have organized and hosted each February. In fact, due to COVID, these events are going to take place in February of 2021, but they will be virtual. And so the 7th annual Nitrogen Management Conference will be held February 9th, and we'll begin promoting these very shortly. And so you'll see information, but that one will highlight nitrogen specific practice-related research from Minnesota and other states in the Midwest. So much like content will be very similar to past years, just the delivery method will be different. And then likewise on February 16th, we'll be hosting our 13th annual Nutrient Management Conference, which is more broad and covers more than just nitrogen, covers pretty much all of the essential nutrients. But again, focusing on Minnesota-based and other surrounding state research to help farmers and others who are interested not just in agronomics and nutrient management, but also water quality as well. I also wanted to mention that starting tomorrow, we're launching a series of 7 virtual conferences through our Discovery Farms program here in Minnesota and in partnership with Discovery Farms in Wisconsin over the next 3 Wednesdays in December starting tomorrow, and then we'll take a couple weeks off for the holidays, and then the 4 Wednesdays in January from 12 to 1 Central Time, or over our noon hour, there will be a series of 1-hour discussions on various issues ranging from climate impacts on what farmers are doing and how farmers are responding to nutrient management, manure management, all of those sorts of factors. A lot of it will involve Discovery Farms data, but others are more general. So if you want to learn more about that, if you haven't seen emails about that, go to our website, mawrc.org, and click on the events page, and you'll find more information on that video conference or virtual conference series as well. I'm not seeing any more questions come in. And so with that, I would just like to thank all of our sponsors again for helping make today possible. I also want to give a huge thanks to our presenters. You guys have done a great job. We appreciate you all making yourself available and sharing your expertise with us this morning. I also want to thank all of you who have joined us for spending your morning with us. A reminder that if you would like to get credits for CCA, CEU credits for your participation, make sure you sent an email. Thank you to those who have already done that, or put it in the chat box. We have gotten several. And then I also want to thank Tim Raditz. Tim is with Discovery Farms and MAWRC and been working behind the scenes to make sure the technology goes well this morning. And so I want to thank Tim for his role in that. I'm not seeing any more questions come in, and this is one of the challenges of doing Zoom meetings. You can't really read the room and look for that last question. But I just want to thank you all for joining. Hopefully you've gotten your questions answered and learned more about the Minnesota Nutrient Stewardship certification program. If you're looking for more information, you now know who some of the people are who might have answers to your questions. And then we've also included some web information in the chat boxes as well. So hopefully we can continue that conversation. With that, we'll sign off. Thank you.
Thanks, Warren. One note for people that if you're looking to watch this at a later date or want to forward it to people, it will be up on our YouTube channel and on our Facebook page, the MAWRC Facebook page. So just thought I'd get that in there as well.
Perfect. Thanks for that, Tim.